For a second time now, an international coalition has struck at Houthi installations and bases in Yemen. 6 countries were involved, including Australia, the Netherlands, Bahrain and Canada. But only the United Kingdom and the United States actually fired upon targets. Now, some had hoped, with hindsight perhaps in vain, that the first coordinated strike would have been sufficient to deter the militia group from continuing its attacks on commercial shipping passing through the Red Sea. That clearly did not happen. The Houthis say their attacks are directly linked to Israel's pursuit of Hamas. The West disagrees. I'm Niall Paterson, and on this edition of the Sky News Daily, we will look in depth at what happened, the likely effect it will have on Houthi strikes, and the fears associated with a deepening British involvement in military strikes. Later, we'll be joined by our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, but let's begin with our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn, and our military analyst, Michael Clarke. Michael, to you first. Let's just start with the basics. What do we know about what happened and our involvement in it?
Yeah, the British involvement was a carbon copy of what happened on the 11th of January. So RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was the base for 4 RAF Typhoons, GR4s, took off and flew to just outside Sana'a and then circled the target a bit and then went back. That's 3,200 miles, so it's a pretty long stag to do. They were carrying Paveway 4 bombs. They dropped 8 hits using 2 bombs each. So there were 16 bombs available over the target area in 2 areas near the airport, almost certainly the airfield. I think they probably went for SAM sites, surface-to-air missile sites, fixed radars and all the things that go with SAMs. And they destroyed 8 targets itself using 2 bombs each. And then there were a couple of Voyager tankers in the air, air-to-air refueling tankers, one to refuel on the way out, one to refuel on the way back. And that was it. That was the exercise, just like the 11th of January, with the Americans providing all of the other, electronic warfare. So while the Americans were attacking their targets, the British were attacking a target deep inland. Nothing to do, actually, with throwing missiles at ships in the Red Sea. It was all to do, this one, with taking down, I think, Houthi air defences, and that's kind of an important signal.
Signalling, presumably, what we're going to be doing this again very soon.
Absolutely, and that if Allied aircraft want to range over Houthi territory, they'll do it a bit more safely if it comes to that. And I think that was the idea. Partly also to impose costs on the Houthis, to say, look, every time you keep on attacking ships in the Red Sea, you're going to pay more for it. So the costs will keep going up. However, there is also an issue that the Allies are running out of targets. They're running out of useful targets and pop-up targets where you just whack-a-mole. We can't do anything about that in Britain because we don't have the air cover. The Americans can do something about that because they've got an air base with F-16s in Djibouti. They can run combat air patrols, and they've got the Eisenhower right on station, so they can have F-18s also running over Yemen. But we can't do that. We can only go to, as it were, fixed targets that we've decided on at least 24 hours in advance.
Dom, I mean, is there any evidence that this is in any way deterring the Houthis or indeed degrading their capacity, as we keep hearing from the politician?
Well, certainly from Rishi Sunak, they were successful 2 weeks ago in degrading, but of course degrading is an easy thing to say. You can just need to damage a bunker and take out a few missiles. The problem, I think, is that for this to be effective, it's got to be 100% effective, because the aim of this military action is to make the Red Sea safe again for international shipping, which has been deterred by punitively high insurance costs. They've gone up, in some cases, by as much as 20 times. And that's why container ships and fuel tankers and the rest are having to go around the continent of Africa now. That's a threat to the international economy. It's also a threat to the political fortunes and ambitions of the 2 leaders who've been involved in this. Of course, both Biden and Sunak up for election this year. If inflation soars again because of this, that is a direct political threat to them. So there's a line to, I think, draw there as well. But as long as the Houthis retain this ability, this capability to menace shipping, that insurance remains high, and we're not going to get international shipping back into the Red Sea. So they've actually got to eradicate the threat completely. As long as the Houthis remain, at large in the desert with some kind of capability, it's not like knocking out the guns of Navarone. The Houthis have a mobile capability. They're resilient and resourceful in the deserts of Yemen. And I think that is going to be almost impossible for the British and Americans to eradicate that threat completely.
That was exactly my question. I mean, isn't it impossible to take on a side like the Houthis in this manner? Well, I mean, if it's a war of attrition that we're going for here, I mean, 8 bombs being dropped doesn't sound like an overwhelming amount to me. And if we're running out of targets already, I mean, this is unwinnable.
Yes, you get to the point where you're moving the sand around in the desert, which I think was said in the Iraq War, and I think that is the problem, as Michael was saying. It's a question of whack-a-mole. If you can stay mobile as an enemy and keep putting drones up and keep firing, you don't have to sink any ships or threaten ships in that sense. You have to just menace them and make shipping companies worried about the threat to their shipping of going through the Red Sea, and that vital artery to international commerce is then compromised. So they're having to weigh that up, the British and American politicians and military plans, but also weigh it up against the possibility that this is actually counterproductive, because the Yemeni government has said the Houthis are doing this largely for propaganda purposes, and they are really reaping a propaganda victory from this. What they're saying is, look, we're the only ones standing up for the Gazans, the Palestinians in Gaza. So when Rishi Sunak in the House of Commons and Keir Starmer says this is totally unrelated to Gaza, that's pretty disingenuous, because this is being waged by the Houthis for propaganda reasons. They say they are doing what the corrupt autocrats in Riyadh, Abu Dhabi and Dubai should be doing, which is standing up for the Palestinian brothers and sisters. They're not doing that, so they say they're doing it, and the Iranians are backing them. You can argue about the rights and wrongs of that, but in terms of propaganda, they're certainly reaping a victory here. And as we saw on our own app today, characters like Tim Houthi Chalamet, who's a Houthi influencer who's been going around the boats that have been hijacked by the Houthis, are making a song and dance about that online. All of that is good news for the Houthis in terms of PR, and it's not great, frankly, for the standing of Britain and America to be seen to be bombing one of the world's poorest countries in support, in the minds of many people, of another country doing something very similar in another poor part of the world. So that's how it's been seen by, arguably tens of millions of Arabs and beyond.
But Michael, just pick up on what Dom was saying there. I mean, is it entirely disingenuous of Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak to say that this is nothing to do with Israel when, the Houthis themselves say, if the aerial bombardment, if the ground assault in Gaza stops, we will stop these attacks? I don't believe them. I'm not sure you would believe them at that point.
Yeah, and the ship that we're talking about was the Galaxy Leader, which was hijacked in mid-November. It's taken to the Houthis port, whose name is completely escaped. Thank you. It's a car carrier. It's a ro-ro carrier. It's full of new cars. So I think we'll see Houthi leaders driving around in them before too long.
Owned by one of Israel's richest men, or partly owned at least.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is that I don't for a minute believe that the Houthis would stop this campaign if there were a ceasefire in Gaza. It is about Gaza in the sense that the Gaza crisis triggered all of this. It also triggered Iran taking a more assertive attitude towards missile attacks in Pakistan over the Balochis and so on. There's a sort of sense that a sort of a restraint has been lifted across the Middle East because everybody expects there to be more violence. So in that respect, you can't say it's not about Gaza, but the Houthis are not doing this for the Palestinians. They're using that as their excuse, but they're getting very good press for it, as Dom says, around the world. And as I keep saying, don't forget, it's that, the Houthis are not the most progressive force in the world. They're the people who've reintroduced slavery into Yemen, real slavery. Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthis, and his whole extended family, they all have slaves. And we're not talking here about just people on low incomes. We're talking about real slaves, including sex slaves, and girls who have been repeatedly raped and sold in slave markets and so on. I mean, they behave like the Islamic State crowd in the caliphate that existed for a few ill-fated years.
I mean, Dom, why are we involved in this? Is it that we have some special capability that the United States military doesn't have? Probably not that. Or is it simply, if you're going to be carrying out actions like this outside a United Nations Security Council ruling or whatever else, you probably need some friends standing by you when you're doing it?
I think it's probably a mixture of, we have a capability, we have a history of supporting America, we're very close to America in intelligence gathering, we have this special relationship which means a lot to us. It allows us to sort of punch above our weight because of our good connections with America. We've also been directly attacked by the Houthis and threatened, so we can claim that right to self-defence. So there are lots of very good reasons to carry out this action. I think I disagree with both of you in the sense I think that the Houthis are absolutely right, Michael. I think they're being totally disingenuous themselves when they say they're doing this to support the Palestinians. They're doing this for good PR reasons, and they know how it plays in the Arab street. And, it's a slam dunk for them. But I think they probably will end it, or they certainly reduce significantly their shenanigans in the Red Sea if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, because that's, in line with their storyline. They can say that they've helped bring that about, and they're more convincing if they.
But they'd still like to keep the threat open in the Red Sea, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
they'd like to keep that.
Well, they've shown they can do it now.
Exactly. As you say, just by keeping the threat alive, by doing just something every now and again, they affect world trade, and that's what they want.
Yeah, and it exposes the weaknesses in the international commercial system. We have these jugular points that can be threatened, and the Houthis have shown that they can do so, which is an ongoing problem for not just for Britain and America, but also for China, that's kind of taking a free ride on this. They're affected by this economically as well. I mean, Tesla has stopped production because it can't get its parts from the factory in Shanghai.
Just to kind of conclude where we started then, Michael, if we are to expect further British involvement, first and foremost, will it be pretty much more of the same? Second point, I mean, as part of the reason that we have these issues in the Red Sea right now, simply that Britannia no longer rules the waves. We don't have the navy we once have, do we?
Oh, that's for sure. I mean, HMS Diamond is doing a good job in the Red Sea in air defence, but I mean, it will be short of supplies, and it's got to go back to Gibraltar to restock. We could continue operating from Cyprus, but, that's a long way away. That's 1,600 miles away from the target area. Wouldn't it be interesting if we had an aircraft carrier?
Well, why is Big Lizzie not involved in this?
We've got two. We've got Queen Elizabeth and we've got the Prince of Wales, both beside each other in Portsmouth, going nowhere, because we haven't got the support ships to send one at short notice.
I think it was the SNP in the debate we just listened to who was saying, can we have possibly a convoy system like the Atlantic convoy? Actually, if you can't achieve this from the air, and it's questionable as to whether you can totally eradicate the Houthi threat from the air, then there's going to need to be some kind of naval escort.
Is that feasible? Yeah, but the car carriers, those who take the cars, like the Galaxy Leader, they have said that they won't believe in a convoy system because if the Houthis could put together one coordinated attack with 12, 15, 20 drones and missiles, they'll get lucky sooner or later. And if they hit one of these 50,000-ton car transporters, then they really will get lucky. So, I mean, a convoy system would certainly help, and some ships would take that risk, but it wouldn't completely solve the problem, is what we're hearing from the commercial world.
It's something we're going to talk about in more depth with Sam Coates in just a moment. But in terms of British involvement, already you've noticed in that debate in the Commons, people starting to get concerned about the level of British involvement until they stop. If they're not going to stop, how do we extricate ourselves from this?
Well, my glib answer to that is that we will continue to do that until the Iranians, for whatever reason, decide to tell them to stop and are able to make most of it stop. So it's an open-ended commitment. The alternative is to just let the Houthis hold the world economy hostage for the next 2 to 3 years, and that's not very acceptable either. So as always, by the time democracies deploy military force, you're already choosing between lesser evils.
And I think, longer term, this is a threat that will have to be dealt with. But, in the same way as that there is a threat constantly in the Persian Gulf to the Iranians directly getting involved there, it's just something the world has to live with. But I think in terms of how long this will go on, it's probably as long as the Gaza war goes on for as well. And I think things are moving possibly in the direction of a ceasefire in a number of ways there. And I think if that does come about, we're talking about possibly a 2-month ceasefire the Israelis are happy with. If all the hostages are got out, then that could lead, I think, to a reduction in activity in the Red Sea. But it does show the whole thing. It does show how that this war in Gaza, you can argue about the rights or wrongs of the Israelis continuing for month after month after month with more than 25,000 people dead now, that it is still the cause of great regional instability and still the fear that, this could become an even bigger, more regional conflict.
Michael, Dom, thank you very much indeed. Stay right where you are. In a moment, we will be speaking to Sam Coates about the debate in the Commons as to the extent, or perhaps better put, the limits of UK involvement against the Houthis. Back soon. Welcome back. As with the first attempt to subdue the Houthis, yesterday's assault prompted something of a collective intake of breath, despite the fact that there is broad political support for the UK defending its interests in the region. But for how long will that consensus persist? In the Commons, even Conservative MPs were raising the issue of a potentially open-ended commitment to military action in Yemen.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I express my full support for the action that the Prime Minister has approved? But could I ask my right honourable friend to extend his strategic objectives? Because it seems that this threat will remain so long as the Houthis have a safe haven to operate from. And it is a question of how we deal with what is effectively an ungoverned space, that part of Yemen.
our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is here. Sam, just explain first, what does the government have to do at times like this? Is there some constitutional obligation to inform the Speaker of the House of Commons, to inform the Leader of the Opposition?
Oh, God, trust you, Neil, to bring up the most boring question in British politics.
Thanks, mate.
No, he doesn't. But there is some whinging about what happened last night, but there was some whinging about what happened 2 weeks ago when we had the first set of strikes, which was that there was too much communication. David Cameron walked in through the front door of number 10 ahead of a cabinet call. Grant Shapps, 24 hours previously, had said, watch this space about bombing the Houthis, and the Americans got cross. They did get cross. Grant Shapps might deny they got cross. I literally have heard again today, the Americans got cross. So, unsurprisingly, Rishi Sunak took the opposite approach for the bombings last night. Not least, I mean, are we all mad? Labour have said they support this, right? So this is not a matter of party division. We know there is a cross-party consensus for this action. It should be taken as presumed that there is consent for the second time, as with the first, because there was no indication to the contrary. So why are we even asking this question?
Well, I suppose there is one reason why we might ask this question. As Keir Starmer said at the dispatch box today, their support for these strikes against the Houthis, it's conditional. It's on a case-by-case basis. So the debate will be retrospective, but surely there has to be some opportunity for debate in the aftermath of an attack like this in a part of the world like this.
Yes, and that's what's happened today. It's what will happen tomorrow in the House of Commons. I think Keir Starmer may want to remind the Prime Minister of courtesy and the niceties of politics, but I don't think his support was ever actually in doubt. Sam,
before speaking to you, of course, we were speaking to Dom and Michael, and their assumption is, given the targets that we hit on the second of the attacks on Houthi bases and installations, that we should expect more of this to come. There is, as you say, broad political support for these attacks, the defence of our interests in the region, as it's described by Rishi Sunak. But do you see that as continuing ad infinitum?
If I could just frame my reply to that, it's like, what's the end game? Right, Rishi Sunak in the Commons today said, I know everybody wants to know the end game, and then listed 5 things, none of which were the end game, right? He said, well, what we're doing is we are talking to Iran and we're going to help the Yemen government and on and on and on. None of that's the end game. Right, this stops when the Houthis decide to stop, are killed, or come to the negotiating table and start to negotiate a settlement, right? So the question is, which of those 3 does the government think it's going to be? And the truth is, I know the government doesn't know and is sort of looking at all 3, right? And so you ask, how long is it going to last? I mean, until you can answer how it's going to end, you don't know the answer to that question. And I think it was Joe Biden who brought this all into rather sharp relief, because he was asked in the last couple of days, is it working, the Houthi bombing? And he said no. And I think that was a bit of a possibly over-stark wake-up call to everybody. I happen to know that the government is looking at lessons from history when it comes to Yemen and the Houthis. So what happened when the Saudis mounted their bombing campaign against the Houthis? Well, in the end, that didn't work. But what did work was Saudis paying reparations to the Houthis, basically paying them off, right? If nothing else works, then the paying them off option could possibly, maybe...
Yeah, well, surely more of an option, right, for a country like Saudi Arabia than it is an option for a country like the United Kingdom.
It depends whether or not... I don't think we're talking about the United Kingdom government paying off the Houthis, but Britain has very strong diplomatic links with Saudi, whether you like it or not, and a lot of people don't like it. So is the route out of this by leaning on our diplomatic relationship with Saudi in order to work out if there is a grand bargain to be struck? Because the lesson of history is that simply bombing and escalating the bombing doesn't work.
Just finally then, Sam, how long do you think Rishi Sunak can rely on the support from the opposition benches, given the tempo, given the level of involvement that the United Kingdom is giving? It doesn't look like Keir Starmer is desperate to make a political issue out of this, not right now anyway.
I think the opposition are on side for now. I think I've got quite a dark outlook on where we might be heading, though, Neil. I think we're in quite a sort of difficult place. We don't know what the end game is in Israel with Hamas and Gaza, and things are tricky there. I think that there is a lot of diplomatic concern that hasn't spilled out into the news about Lebanon and whether or not Hezbollah are on the verge, as some people believe. I think the French and Americans believe, I think the British do too, that Hezbollah might start undertaking revenge attacks against Israel in order to, make a point about the bombings that Israel conducted. Your question is about opposition backing. I think so long as the current kind of configuration of action and priority remains as it is, and I think it's fine, Labour on board with that. I don't know where we're going to be in a month. And we might be in a better place in a month, but we might not be in a better place in a month.
We might be in an awful place in a month.
We might be in an awful place in a month. So watch this space. I can't predict the future, but there are lots and lots and lots of lines here that I'm watching very, very closely.
It's never stopped you trying. Sam Coates, good to have you on the podcast again. Thanks very much indeed. So, we should be in no doubt. These are dark days indeed, and with the potential for the sky to further blacken with the smoke of all-out war in the Middle East. And if it so transpires, yes, there will be debate as to the extent of British involvement, but ultimately, we will be involved. That's your lot for today. We'll see you next time.